Hi, good day. I'm here about to discuss and report about the cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of therapy that was developed by Aaron Beck with the idea that we can change our thoughts, our behaviors, and it can change our feelings. Now, CBT is what we usually call it, is used to treat mental health symptoms and mental health disorders. Now, CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is a form of talking therapy which can be used to treat people with wide range of mental health problems. CBT is based on the idea on how we think, which touches about cognition, how we feel, that is emotion, and how we act, our behavior, all interact together. And as you can see in the middle there, you have there the core beliefs, or the heart of concept. Now, these are some of the common methods used in CBT. Now we have here disputing irrational beliefs, doing cognitive homework, changing one's language, using humor, rational emotive imagery, role playing, shame attacking exercises, use of motivation, desensitization, skills training, assertiveness training. Now, there's a difference between assertive and aggressive. So, it teaches you not to be aggressive, but rather to be assertive. Now, laying out the blueprint, there are several approaches in it. So let's just try to lay out the blueprint and see what's inside CBT. You have their behavioral approach. Now this is touching about the classical conditioning, the operant conditioning, and the social learning theory. And when you say about the classical conditioning, it automatically translates to Pavlov's dogs. And when you say operant conditioning, it talks about, or it touches about Skinner boxes and Skinner's cats. Now, when you say social learning theory, this is about how we watch others and learn behavior through it. Next is we have cognitive approach. Now, this one is based on cognitive theories in psychology, which eventually evolved into the cognitive model by Aaron Beck. Now, this results from modifying dysfunctional thinking and beliefs. So when you say cognitive approach, it touches about trying to change the dysfunctional thinking and its beliefs that are erroneous. Next is cognitive behavioral approach. This one integrates with behavioral and cognitive techniques, which is mostly used because it follows a medical model. This is usually used in treatment of phobias before, and now it has evolved into treatment of several anxieties and other mood disorders. This one has a lot of research backed into it. There's a lot of data in it, and it's very different because it's a study compared to some structures of therapy that is based on philosophy. Now, this one has a brief and simple structure rather than philosophy-based ones like psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic one, which when you say talk about it, it's more a philosophical approach to such treatment, and it's very broad compared to the CBT as direct. Like for instance, A is to B to C. There's some structures in it that has been established. And the last one would be mindfulness based, which is the third wave according to behaviorists. Now, it is very it's paradoxical rather that the mindfulness does not try to change symptoms. Now, in it involves watching how you breathe, quieting your mind. Just try to be quiet and observe what's going on around your environment, and not to change it rather. So I had the training with that, with in relation to that, with Copers and 4ID, which I was very thankful about. That it's very for me counterintuitive compared to the two first approach that I just discussed earlier. Now, the cognitive approach is more of, or rather, the behavioral approach is more of the teaching part, and that the cognitive approach is more of the one who instigates change or trying to change things. Now, mindfulness is the opposite of the two, but despite that, it's still been utilized or being part of the treatment of CBT. So we'll get to that eventually. Okay, let's stay here so that we won't get hit by his hand. Now, this is Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy, we'll start with that, insight focused therapy, emphasizes on changing the negative thoughts and maladaptive beliefs. Theoretical assumptions that people's internal communication is accessible to reflection, that the client's beliefs have highly personal meaning. These meanings can be discovered by the client rather than being taught or interpreted by the therapist. So, instead, the therapist interpreting it and giving the client information, this one is mostly the client trying to discover it and learning the meaning behind it, rather than the therapist telling him that that's the meaning, that should be that is the thing that that's been bothering, and so on and so forth. So this is more of discovery from the client and realizing, and then the change starts from there. Now, Aaron Beck, going a little back with history, is the father of cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy. And he developed his ideas from the research work of Albert Ellis, who developed RABT, which is Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. That one. Now, Aaron Beck is the youngest child of the four, from a Ukrainian Jewish descent. They're immigrants. Beck was married in 1950 to Phyllis Beck, who was the first woman judge on the Court of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So you see, they're very influential, very powerful individuals. Now, it began in the mid of 1960s. It simply began with his first treatment, which was the treatment for phobias. So what he utilized there was the systematic desensitization. Now, it was simple, very simplistic and contained, which was easy to gather data or have research on. The first time before, it was separated that the cognitive scientists and the behavioral scientists. So basically, they were very they were separate, and you have separate schools of thought. But eventually, they realized that the one could not live without the other, so they tend to work within that kind of perspective. Now, in 1980s, it was involved or included types of. It was just basically for phobia, but in the mid 80s, I think the CBT included now anxiety and treatment for mood disorders. However, nobody was touching personality disorders yet at that time until the end of 80s. There was this Jeff Young who called the schema therapy, which is meant to address personality disorders. Now, Beck published his first paper on cognitive distortions and depression, and eventually received a letter after that from Albert Ellis, who was way ahead of his time and refining his REBT. And aside from the influences and concept of Ellis, Beck also had influences from George Kelly at Ohio State University, who wrote 2 books about constructs of psychopathology. Now, looking at the juice, call it the juice, significant contributions of field of Ellis's ABC theory of chain. Now, we're including Albert Ellis here because he's also one of the proponents of CBT. Since CBT is more of a very integrated part of cognitive theory and other aspects of it. So, one would be rational emotive behavioral therapy. It means that our thoughts and situations, about the situation rather, not the situation itself, are a source of emotional and behavioral problems. Now, we have an ABC through this, which is A is activating event, life experiences or events that activate such. Next would be B, the belief about the meaning of that event. Could be anything. It depends on the person how that event means to him or her. And C, which is the emotional or behavioral consequences of based on that belief. Now, for example, if there's an event like breaking up with a relationship, and for example, just an example, having a breakup, and then the individual would take it as, oh, since I broke up with her and nobody will love me like that, or something like that of some sort. So for him, that would be the meaning of it. So nobody loves me, so only that person could love me. So the consequences would be several. We probably would be, as a result of that, the person would tend to isolate him or herself from anybody. So that would cut off the opportunities of him or her meeting other people. So along the way, that the kind of wrong belief or erroneous belief, it leads to erroneous decisions and so on and so forth, and everything would be on a cycle of errors. Okay. Now, what's the worst of this thing? It's because it doesn't stop of that feeling, but rather it involves eventually with depression and physiological problems. So, having that physiological problems or depression would entail another addition to the problem that goes back on top, and then, okay, I am physiologically not well, so going back to the belief like, Okay, nobody's gonna love me because first I'm not physiological will. Then it goes on a loop, I guess. Now the CBT in a nutshell intervenes in the middle. It intervenes in the middle and somehow try to correct it, and looking out for possible positive outlook. And it is there are several methods in intervening, such as challenging such notion or belief, and from there it tries to correct the cycle, that it wouldn't be like a loop, but it would move on forward slowly on a different direction. We have an overview of counseling process and CBT. There are 4 basic phase or steps in that perspective. Should I put it here? Yeah, I'll put it here. One would be assessment, which is finding out the symptoms, symptoms of what's not working, what is not right, all of those questions asked, and you try to assess the individual and what makes it wrong, and so on and so forth. Next would be target behaviors, thoughts for change. This one is usually concrete and specific. Example is trying to figure out the frequency to reduce or eliminate such behavior. Okay, like what we do in a practice, that there are journals, and with detailed journaling from the client, we get to see the pattern, and we try to insert such, or ourselves, or rather the tools used to break free from those patterns or loop. And how we do that is basically educate. Now, setting up reinforcements to the desired behaviors that we're trying to change into a desired behavior, and finding ways to change the beliefs related to the problems is through educate them. And psychoeducation is somehow also linked with, or can also be used, or these things are tools for us to utilize. And the last would be replace and retain. This is to retain the stimuli if the outcome is good, or replace it if it's erroneous. So if it doesn't go to the correct outcome or the expected outcome, we tend to replace it. And if it does get to our goals, or its expected outcome of the desired behavior, then we try to retain it. So as with a very easy concept like classical conditioning or operant conditioning in this sense. Now, I gotta move here. Now, making connection, the therapeutic relationship. Now, this is important where the client and therapist would communicate and play roles or parts of the therapy. It's very important. This is where the communication comes in and tries, or how we translate things. I'll put it in here. The therapeutic relationship. This means that the relationship between client and the expert is you're the educator and expert, and empathy and cognition behavioral counseling is used to build up connections, or rather rapport, to allow the therapy could happen. So this is basically where it starts, where the empathy is used or utilized so that there's an opening or an opportunity for the therapist to come in and sort of understand from within and make those little adjustments. But that's not on an immediate scale. Eventually, by using the empathy. And next is contemporary cognitive behavioral alliance, which tends to be more egalitarian. And next would be written contracts, which are composed of homeworks and other paperworks. Written contracts are supposed to be not just for documentation, but also can be used to engage the clients, engage by giving homeworks, or engage them in being participative, I guess, in the process, that they are very much involved. So the whole process there is for them to engage mostly on the therapy. It's not the therapist who is going to rather do this or do that, but rather it's more of a cumulative, or what do you call that? It's more of the engaging part. The more the client engages with the process, and it gets the more the client gets to be closer to his or her goal. Oh no, let's go back here, going down. Now, the viewing, or we call it case conceptualization. So there are components in the case conceptualization when we do CBT or therapy. One would be baseline functioning. Of course, that's where we start everything. Excuse me. Next would be cognitive behavioral functioning, functional analysis. Another one would be schemas and core beliefs. Another would be distorted conditions. Others would be irrational beliefs and the three basic musts, negative and cognitive triad, basic id. I thought that was basic ID. It's basic id, DSM diagnosis. So when we try to take in a case, we have a case conceptualization with these factors or components in it. Now, next would be baseline functioning. This provides as a starting point for measuring change. Now, women, I guess, would be very, very familiar of what my picture is there. Although, I think that's a foundation. If usually calls it in a makeup, it's foundation. So baseline functioning is the foundation, sort of, or where you start. Now, what's in it is client's log. The client would usually log in frequency, duration, severity of specific behavioral symptoms. Also identify antecedents, events that may trigger the symptoms. Sorry. Now, this provides more detailed and accurate information about behaviors. I don't know if this is the exact one, but when we start, or before we start the session, it's usually we tend to have that we call it an intake interview, which lasts for like an hour or two, where we take in we sort of like write in the profile of the client, write down notes, write down the events that happened, and if it's possible, it also taking in data from the parents, caretakers, caregivers, and so on and so forth, for those people who get to see the client, observe the client rather in their environment. When does it usually happens? What happens if it has its episode, and what usually is the client doing? Client coming from getting information from the client himself or herself, or having that support of information coming from the people around him or in his environment. Uh, this also touches what usually goes in a day and what happens to the client and what does the client do. When filling up rating forms, this is what I usually do, and this is just in my opinion that we usually do, like especially in rated forms or rating forms, that I don't only take in the information coming from the client, but also to have a side note on it and put the information coming from perhaps the parents or the people living around him, or if they are available or they are the ones assisting the client. And then that would be very helpful in side notes, and we could use that, and it could be a very good baseline for before starting sessions, or having to try to check and balance with the information coming in. But anyway, it's just trying to put baseline. Next is cognitive behavioral function analysis. Functional analysis that involves careful analysis of antecedents and consequences of the problem, thoughts, and behaviors. Used to examine what person was doing and thinking, as well as what was going on in the environment before, during, and after an episode of symptom. I'm going to go in the middle. Here we go. Okay. Now, this is similar to the baseline functioning, but this one has a detailed, much more detail on it, deeper than the baseline. This is now recording the patterns and behaviors of the client. Has detailed occurrences, and it's more like a profiling, but this one includes not just the person, but what the person is doing. This is usually seen in the middle, or during, or while you're going through the process of the therapy. Usually what happens is we tend to check the journals, or their journals, when they're when they're given a task, so or assignments perhaps. So there's this journaling, that what happens in a day, and they get to write it down in a period of time, like a week or so, and then the therapist would tend to sort of discuss it, and both of them gets to review it and what happened. So it's basically the journey there is not just with the client, but with the therapist also. That you engage in the journey and have the conversation of what transpired, so that you can also monitor when does it happen, what kind of stressors, and what usually happens when the episode comes in. Next would be schemas and core beliefs. Schemas and core beliefs touches on dysfunctional thinking. Dysfunctional schemas are a root source of psychopathology. Core beliefs, like autonomy, beliefs are being effective and productive versus helpless. Sociotropic means beliefs about being lovable or unlovable. And the schemas in it, cognitive frameworks in the mind, organizing and shaping thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And we get to see that because that's the heart of the CBT, the core beliefs. Now, when you say schemas are mostly like, let's just see, it's the color of how we see life. Okay? Now, the cognitive behavioral therapy tries to identify the schemas and core beliefs, especially those ones that are unhealthy or erroneous, or where the problem starts. Okay, these are core beliefs are usually followed by intermediate beliefs, and intermediate beliefs are sort of in the middle, and then the next one would be automatic thoughts. So if we can, the CBT usually targets the core beliefs, so that the intermediate beliefs will be corrected, and so would with the automatic thoughts. So it targets from there, and once this one is corrected, then it follows with the other. Now, when does this usually happen? Now, immediate beliefs are usually the rules. Talking about immediate beliefs, since we know what the core beliefs are the rules and attitudes, expectations, which individuals sometimes distorts, or so it carries around us by the encounter or life events that we have that could be stressful. And when we encounter these stressful events, that's where the automatic thought comes out. So if the intermediate beliefs are already erroneous, then the automatic thoughts is already also, it's also erroneous. Whoa. Let me put my face there. Now, there are many cognitive distortions, and we'll give you, or we'll touch some of the samples here. Distorted automatic thoughts, not thought, but thoughts, and immediate beliefs. One would be, these are the examples, the one would be consistent errors of thinking. Consistent errors of thinking are necessarily are usually tied to core beliefs. They usually overlap. These are the consistent thoughts, wrong thoughts rather, that the client consistently makes. Okay, usually people having this kind of consistent erroneous things are clients with depression and anxiety. All or nothing thinking, black and white, polarized, or dichotomous thinking. So it's just black and white, which is not very realistic. So, but that's the error there. The thinking of black and white. It's either you're good, or you're bad. It's usually seen in roles that being played, like it's either I'm a good parent or I'm a bad parent. There's no like in between. I should be good or I shouldn't be bad. It's like that. There's like no errors in it. It's black or white. If I commit something little error, then I'm totally bad. So that's one of the cognitive distortions or erroneous thinking. Next is catastrophizing or fortune telling. There are depressive-like symptoms. Usually, I sort of likened it to the what do you call that? The Pinoy saying. They call it advance mag-isip. Okay. Fortune telling. Some people would usually would reason out like unhan na lang nako daan. I get to see that. I mean, in my experience, I get to see that with kids. I get to see that with my daughter, giving out tantrums because she knows and she expects me to say no. But that's on a little kid, and it's on a self-defense mechanism. But for adults to have that kind of perspective is not really. It's sort of unusual because those are kids trying to learn, and then for adults to still have that at that specific age or stage is unusual. So it's catastrophizing. For me, it's just on my experience. Next, disqualifying or discounting the positive. These are depressive-like symptoms again. I get to see this mostly on my clients. They don't see the positive outcome of things. Everything is seen in a negative perspective, and they don't see the good. There's no silver lining in it. It's just basically nothing. I mean, for depressive clients, yes, you get to see that because there's no hope in it, no change in that perspective, or you get to hear experiences like everything is negative, and when you try to sleep, everything is negative, and then when you wake up, it's still negative, and it breeds to or creates something of a hopelessness. Then you don't take to look at the positive things. Next is emotional reasoning. Was I clear about disqualifying positive? So basically, no positive, no light seen in the dark. Basically, there's no hope. There's no positive in it, regardless if it's just, oh, I got, there's a silver lining. It can't be seen. Everything is negative. Next is emotional reasoning. Believes it's true because it's what they feel. This bases on the current feeling and neglects or discounts, disregards the facts. Okay. The thinking here is because that's what they feel, it must be true, and it's that what they believe, regardless if it's not factual or not true. Now, on a note, with this distortion, it's a good opportunity to ask the difference between feeling and believing. Strong belief that the client is interpreting. So, they tend to rather go with what they feel about things rather than facts. Like, for example, like crossing the road, like I feel I'm gonna get hit, I'm never gonna cross the road, I will get hit, and that's what I feel afraid and everything in it, regardless of looking at, oh, there's a pedestrian and there's facts, then nobody gets hit because there's a pedestrian. I don't know if it works here in the Philippines because nobody follows traffic rules, but what they usually believe what they feel, regardless if it's erroneous or it's not based by facts. Next is mislabeling and labeling. Labels are usually rigid, global, and less reasonable. Unwillingness to weigh evidence or be positive. Okay. Example of labeling is like, I'm a loser. Can't do things anymore because I'm a loser. So one or an individual would be carrying that, like, I can't have any relationship because I'm a loser, and I'm labeled as a loser. So I know I'm gonna fail because I'm a loser anyway. So it's labeling oneself on a term used over and over again. Okay, so that also is another cognitive distortion. Next is magnification or minimization. It usually happens when one tries to evaluate themselves and unreasonably, the unreasonable one tries to be magnified, and then minimize the positive side. Basically, it's just magnifying the negative and minimizing the positive. Like, for example, grades. Okay, for grades, like I have I have all A's except for one B-. And then the individual will tend to focus on the B- and forget about the A's. It's like, oh, maybe it's just an easy subject, but I really have to focus on the B- and dwell on it, and then sit down and weep on it because one has a B-, and forgetting all the whole thing. It's just focusing on that small, might not be small part for that person, but focusing on that part, on the B minus, and then neglecting or forgetting about the rest of the other subjects there. So that's trying to magnify it and then minimize the others. There's another one. We'll have move the face there. Cognitive distortions. One would be mental filter or selective abstraction. This is when the client pays a lot of attention of the proportionate amount of negative detail. It's similar to minimization and trying to catastrophize something. Now they don't see the larger part of the picture with positive details in it. They are looking at the small details of the negative ones, seeing the positive in the whole aspect of the picture, or no, forgetting the positive of the whole picture. Looking at it as really similar to the mental filter, or evaluation is already distorted. It distorts the evaluation. The idea is detecting a pattern and putting the label, not the not the distortion, but rather making use of the treatment plan. The idea here, yeah, it's more of the using of the pattern. Since we get to see the pattern of the distortion, we tend to use of the treatment planning. It's usually used with the mental filter. Next is, was that really understandable? Okay. Next is mind reading. Mind reading is very common, I guess, usually in clients with both depression and anxiety. Knowing what others are thinking. Mind reader. Not consider the possibilities. And an example of that is the passerby. Let's say a friend would see me and say hi to me, but I didn't give any response. So that individual, if has a cognitive, distorted cognition or cognitive distortion, with that mind reading is, one would feel like, oh man, that person did not say hi to me when I said hi, so that person must have hated me, or doesn't really like me, or pretends to like me, so on and so forth, and goes on with whatever the mind plays. So it does not take an account that I or the passerby might have some problems, and usually this happens in Pinoys, like having a poor eyesight, could not see, saying hi or so, or just looking down, looking for pennies, or having earphones themselves, like those kind of possibilities. But on that individual having that kind of problem or distortion would think and take it personally, which is gonna be for the next part, and put meaning onto it, like that person does not like me, does not like me, doesn't say hi, and neglect all other details or possibilities that made the incident. Next is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization is usually seen in cases of anger and frustration. Individual makes a broad negative conclusion that are far beyond, we call it layo ra kaayo. Okay? Layo ra gani. Okay? Very far off. Still advanced, magisip. Like you go back to a failure and incorporate things towards what you do and expect failure because of the past you did. like for instance, let's just say an example of during the college days. Okay, that's a very good example. During college days, like I was the bad boy during the college days, and so I get to bring that, and then opportunities, because I tend to label myself or generalize myself because I'm a bad boy. Opportunities of, like for instance, teaching to kids or be a role model would be discounted in your, wouldn't be included in your, set of thinking, because you labeled yourself from there that you've been a bad boy. So people will doubt it, and you yourself doubt it, that you can do other things with having a positive perspective on it. So you overgeneralize things on that aspect. Next is personalization, which is one particular clients behave negatively because of them having no explanation. Basically, an example of this is dili man gyud na siya ganahan sa ako. Dili siya ganahan sa ako kay itumun ko. Okay. Or and putting it in all what do you call that, in all of it in or try to generalize it even in all perspective. Like for instance, she's not kind because I'm dark skinned. Now she's treating me not fair because because I know that I'm dark skinned and she doesn't like dark skin. So it's like that. And nanagid ilang pagtanaw sa ako ay itumun mong ko. Not to go against itumun or having dark skin. It's just an example. Which is I get to observe from other people. It's something about me rather, and because it's me around the world, it's revolving around me. It's because I'm this. Okay. And then the last one is tunnel vision, which is, it sounds like a mental filter. It's a mixture of mental filter and looking at the details of magnifying it. Okay, it's a mixture of like mental filter and magnification. So the client tends to see the negative aspects of any total situation. The way I sort of understood it, it's more of like if video focuses in finding ways, this tunnel vision focuses in not finding ways. It's the opposite one. So whatever experiences or problems one sort of like encounters, it sort of neglects the possibility of any what do you call that, solution in it, that there's no solution in it, but we have to find it. No, there's no way on it. So it's basically that. And next is irrational beliefs, the 3 basic musts. Irrational beliefs typically flagged by words such as should, ought, must, which has 3 basic categories, which is the perfection-based worth, justice for me, effortless perfection. I placed this clip here because it's ridiculously funny, satirically funny. A clip from Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby saying, "If you ain't first, you're last." So the should and must and so on and so forth. So, it's a fixed idea what how others behave. Okay, people should treat me well, must treat me well, My experiences in it is somehow it goes with, especially with family settings. Clients who have great achievements to maintain, or even none, but expecting somehow great. Um, and you get to see if you try to observe, or sort of, even yourself, try to observe yourself. There are some moments that, oh, I should be great because I must be great because, and it's very common for clients. It's very common for clients that to have the words itself, should, ought, and must, are a very good indicators of irrational beliefs. Okay, it's very common for clients. That's where they have struggles with, because the expectations also that they should or they must. These somehow also incorporates in how they say things. If you try to notice your clients, or clients that have that, they tend to use those words. Okay, now there are some examples after this. There are some examples that probably would explain further. Okay, this one. Okay, now these are should and shoulds, must, and ought. Now I'll go back to the one. Now there are three basic categories. One would be perfection-based worth. Two would be justice for me. Three would be effortless perfection. Now we can incorporate those three basic categories in these statements, or try to find out which statement is which. Okay. One, I absolutely must have sincere love and approval. That there's already a must there. Must have sincere love and approval. Okay. Now, I must be thoroughly competent, adequate, and achieving in all respects. Or what? Otherwise, I am worthless if I don't do this. So you see, there's already an irrational thought there. People who harm me are uniformity, or it's not uniformity. Bad. Uniformity. I think it's people who harm me are uniformity bad, or I think that's a typo error there. Basically, it says people who harm me are bad. All of them are bad. There's what you call that. The notion there, going back to the three categories, is justice for me. When things don't go my way, life is bad. Okay? You can see, basing on the three, that there is effortless perfection. Life should be fair, but it's not, so I cannot succeed. Should be fair and cannot. So if you try to listen to those statements, it does not really go, it's just basically black and white. It doesn't go to the gray area, or doesn't conform to reality, or is not realistic, if that's the case. Unhappiness is caused by external events. Okay. Now, for this statement here, we get to see that there's no control in the situation. However, that we get to look at it in a therapeutic perspective, that there is a locus of control, though, in the argument. Like external events, there's no control there, but the locus of control is within the self. Good people, good. I think this is also a typo error. Good people do good things, and bad people do bad things. It's very black and white and rigid way of thinking, and felt like justice for all still, from the three categories that was mentioned earlier. I must avoid disapproval from any source. That's avoiding the pain or looking at it. Okay, very unrealistic. Because I have failed to accomplish goals in the past, I should give up trying to achieve them in the future. Now, this is common with relationships. I don't know, the way I observe it is, it's usually common in relationships, like because of a bad relationship, one wouldn't engage into another one, and would generalize over things that, I have a bad relationship, so I'm never gonna learn or never gonna have another one. So it's funny. I look at it or see it as like a hugot, no, lines. Other examples, I'm gonna breeze through this. We have, things must be the way I want them to be. I must worry about things that could be dangerous, unpleasant, or frightening. I must avoid life's difficulties, unpleasantness, and responsibilities. Everyone needs to depend on someone stronger than themselves. Events in the past are a cause of my problems. I should become upset when other people have problems. No. Now, when you try to understand the statement, somehow it resonates also when we went to similar situation. True to with our experiences. It's just the difference here is the severity of how one thinks in what do you call that? Sort of amplifies it, and it not just amplifies it, but rather it creates a not just irrational ideas, but rather it makes us unproductive, or what do you call that? It sort of debilitates us. The word there is debilitate. Debilitates us from functioning normally towards society, and even it is becoming harmful towards ourselves with those irrational ideas. However, it's not uncommon, but the difference there is severity. If it's already debilitating, hinders you from moving, hinders you from growing, hinders you from being productive, hinders you from living, self-living. There's also a negative cognitive triad. These are three sets of negative thoughts. Negative thoughts about the self, which worthless. Negative thoughts about the world, environment, life is unfair. Negative thoughts about the future, things will never get better. And we also talk about the basic id. The basic id is behavior, affect, sensation, imagery, cognition, interpersonal relationship, drugs, biology, used for general global assessment or for a specific problem symptom. This has a multimodal therapy organized around 7-pronged assessment of the basic ID. Now we are talking about what is a 7-pronged assessment. This is an assessment treatment follows 7 reciprocally influenced by the dimensions of personality, or modalities known by acronyms of basic id. What are in it are behavior, affect, sensation, imagery, cognition, interpersonal relationships, drugs, and biology. So basically those 7 there. Client focused approach, a multimodal assessment that is used to fit in the treatment of the client. Next would be the utilizing or use of DSM diagnosis. Now, CBT closely aligns with the medical model, so typically organizes treatment using the diagnosis outlined in the DSM. Beck 997 developed a specific cognitive approach for working with different diagnoses. These are depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and substance abuse. A part of the treatment plan is the goal setting, symptoms and problem resolution inside the goal setting, independent problem solvers. Rather, the goal there is not just to intervene with how one breaks the cycle, but also to make the individual have enough tools to be empowered enough to become an independent problem solver and manages behavioral and measurable goals. Doing interventions is basically, these are the interventions. You can name a few. Psychoeducation, Socratic method of guided discovery, meaning you question things, you challenge the statements that one is asking himself. Thought records, the journals that we have, dispute beliefs in REBT self-help form, labeling cognitions, problem solving, and coping skills training. That's the tools basically we try to educate them with. The problem solving tools and the coping, especially the coping one, since most of these things are triggered through stressors. Changing self-talk, stress inoculation. I can do this, I will do this. Okay? Interventions also can be cost-benefit analysis. This approach will sort of gauge you, like, what are my strengths? Am I strong enough? What are my weaknesses? I can work on my weakness. Classical conditioning, just like Pavlov's dogs, and relaxation. Operant conditioning, just like Skinner's cats, and reinforcement techniques. Systematic desensitization, usually used CBT used in treating phobias. In vivo exposing, flooding, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. So there's a lot of tools you can use for interventions. Now, there are steps to change dysfunctional living. Acknowledge that we are responsible for creating our own emotional problems. Not to blame us, but rather acknowledge it. That's accepting we have the ability to change disturbances significantly. Recognize emotional problems stem from irrational beliefs. Clearly perceive these beliefs. Seeing the value of disputing self-defeat beliefs. You try to challenge those things. Accepting the fact to change we must work hard in emotional and behavioral ways to counteract irrational beliefs and dysfunctional feelings and behaviors. And basically all of these are research and evidence-based. So CBT is research and evidence-based. So it's a very big part of the culture of CBT. That's why it's very easier to incorporate this in the, or rather not just incorporate it, but rather get data out of it, because it's very simple, brief, and it's very contained, and the processes are done, or the procedures are done step by step. You have dominate, trauma-focused cognitive behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, panic disorder, cognitive behavioral therapy for general anxiety disorder. These are just some. And then this can also work, Ray. I'll go at top, no, I'll go at the bottom. Work with diverse populations. So different cultures and ethnic diversity, this works on almost across the board. So maybe not all totally, but maybe lacks research or data on there. But mostly here, as mentioned, it works on different diversity. Now this includes what? Diversity and sexual identity diversity, like LGBTQ clients. Therapists usually examine their own beliefs and schemas related to sexual orientation and identity, and the common rational beliefs of clients. Examine the role of societal norms, stigma, play in development of the client's beliefs and schema. Thank you. Now, going back to the, it's just brief. The way I perceive it, I'll just get an example here of how, in a nutshell, cognitive theory or CBT works. It's just this. It's a piece of paper covering things. So everything's negative there and hopelessness. What the therapist does is create tools or educate tools, helps the person sort of have a small one like this one. In a small piece of paper, there's a hole there where the light can pass through, and along the therapy, it gets what, a little bit bigger. So when it gets bigger, light of positivity, and eventually it gets bigger and until barriers gets what do you call that, disappears and tries to return to normal. So basically it's just like that piece of paper, and the therapist's role is to put holes in it so that where the light passes through and sort of find the positivity in it, and eventually opening the whole thing and helping the client. So I won't take long. I think I talked for an hour. I guess I wasn't really mindful about that time. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. If there are questions, please ask or PM me so I can explain fully. I'm just so tense. It's been a while. I haven't done this for a while. Thank you.